Welcome to the New Books Network.
Hello and welcome to another episode on the New Books Network. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. Miranda Melcher, and I'm very pleased today to be speaking with Professor Peder Anker about his book titled For the Love of Bombs, The Trail of Nuclear Suffering, published by Anthem Press in 2025. This book, takes us through nuclear history, but from a different perspective, from a perspective that asks us to think directly, think critically about things like why a tiny little swimsuit is named after a place where a whole bunch of nuclear bombardment happened, why the idea of sex bomb or bombshell has come into our everyday vocabulary, and the people who were directly impacted by the creation of this massively destructive technology even before it's actually dropped out of a plane. So there's, I think, a lot for us to get into here. Peder, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you, Miranda. Such a pleasure being on your podcast. Thank you so much.
Well, I'm very pleased to have you. Could you maybe start us off by introducing yourself a little bit and tell us why you decided to write a book that says right at the outset that it's in many ways about needing to say farewell to Oppenheimer?
So I'm Peder. I'm from Norway in Oslo. I am a historian of science by training, though at heart I'm an environmentalist. I really do care about all the environmental problems we are suffering, including the legacies of the bomb in that way. My entire academic career has been around addressing environmental issues, so that's kind of where I'm coming from. And this is my sixth or seventh book in that domain. And what really started this when I saw the Oppenheimer film, which I really didn't like, though it's fantastic acting. I have to give them that. It was really amazing acting, but the whole narrative I didn't like. I was upset about it. And when they won the best film, I said, this can't be true. It's not. It shouldn't be the best film, even though it is a good film. I don't like the narrative of the film. And so I got upset, and then I wrote this book very fast, based on some old notes, but basically as a big reaction to the film. I thought, okay, if that's not the story, if Oppenheimer is not the story, what is the story? And that is what drove me through this book.
Always interesting when a book starts with a kind of rebellion against a narrative and going, well, hang on a second, what is actually happening here? So as you've done in the book, I think it makes sense to kind of go all the way back before any bombs get dropped anywhere. Of course, they have to be thought of and built in the first place. And in fact, the story goes even back before there's ideas of bombs. Can you tell us about the process of extracting and mining radium and uranium before atomic weaponry is on the scene? I mean, it sounds like a weirdly sort of optimistic thing to do, to extract and mine a substance that no one's really sure what to do with.
Sure. So I wanted to start the story with some sort of a bottom-up perspective or people's history perspective, the ordinary people's experience of nuclear materials, not the scientist or the upper class, if you like, if you want to sort of do a kind of lefty thing on it. So what did the bomb look like from an ordinary point of view? And I also wanted to look with a material history, start with the material itself, uranium. So, and that led me to Canada, to a small place in northern Canada where the uranium came out of a small mine in the Dene nation. Dene is a indigenous tribe in northern Canada. And their mining started in a place called the Forbidden Place. The Forbidden Place was a place where there's supposed to be bad spirits, and there's a prophecy on that space by an indigenous medicine man who said, we're talking about probably, these things of course undated, but probably in the 1880s or 1890s. That is long before the bomb, right? Predicting that this place will be the origin of some real suffering, including, a bomb material falling. So that is kind of where I start. I start with this prophecy that is, I believe, not discussed in the bomb history. So instead of starting on the blackboard in some fancy university in America where people doing equations, I start with indigenous prophecy in Canada, and then I follow the material that is the uranium out of the mine, and that's what I call the trail of nuclear suffering for whoever touched this material on its way to being produced to enriched uranium, and then to ultimately getting it, blown at you. Whoever touched this material, one way or the other, suffered. So there's a lot of suffering comes. It started with the miners. Some of the miners were non-indigenous. They are, that has to do with trust, because you have to use complicated machinery, and indigenous Dane people were not trusted. So we had the miners themselves. What happened to them, we don't know, because they kind of disappeared. These are low-paying jobs and so forth. But the indigenous people, they would stay put at the same place because it's their land. So we do have some knowledge of what happened to them. And what happened to them was not good. They would suffer from various cancers, from various diseases. Indeed, the place where the most of the miners came from is now known as the village of widows. That is, all the guys who worked in the mine or handling the uranium mine. They would most of them would die from cancers. So that is the horrific kind of opening of the book.
And that's a very different opening from the Oppenheimer film. So it gives us that contrast right at the beginning. How did this, I suppose, invasion, I guess, of the nuclear machinery go from Canada to somewhere called Wheat?
So it literally traveled first by boat, and then further down by railroad, down to a small town which is now which was known as Wheat. Wheat is they produced wheat, obviously, but it was a small town in Tennessee, where in a place which is now called Oak Ridge. Wheat was a small little community of farmers, and they were, doing what farmers do. They lived on land which was stolen in many ways from indigenous people, and some of the buildings were built by slaves, but they didn't kind of deal so much with that history as much as dealing with the land itself. They would live in, they would live, out of the land, and it was a rough life in the sense that they would, do agriculture. They would do various water systems. They would try to eke a living out of this land. But there was a very strong sense of community, and with the Manhattan Project, when that was started, they were all kicked out. The land was basically taken from them, and within 2 weeks, they all had to leave. And with that started the process of destroying that the wheat community. And when I talk about wheat community, I don't only think about the people living there, but also the land. So here I'm adopting what is known as environmental history, in which you think about the history of a place not only as a place of people, but also a place of land. So the first thing that was destroyed was the water, with various dams and also pollution. And then it was the land itself. They built a huge factory called the K25 on the land. And then they destroy the air with pollution from burning coal, and all kinds of other environmental destruction that would place at this place. In addition to that, you had people who would the sense of community that used to be in wheat would also fall apart, and you have sort of a land of individuals, land where, because when 70,000 people come into a place to build a community, it's actually not really a community. It's more like small little families and houses and people working in the factory. So that fabric of a community was also taken away, and it became like some sort of city of individuals, which for me becomes an image of what America came to be, namely a country of individuals, because the Oak Ridge town many ways become an ideal for how to think about urban planning in America. So this is also the trail of suffering involves the people who eat were all expelled, but But interestingly, after the war, they will meet again and again every year, once a year, every first Sunday in October. And they met. The last meeting I have seen or seen recorded is in 2014. So by then, most of them had died away and so forth. And now, when I visited Wheat this last June, I could still see fresh flowers on their graves. And so clearly they are still meeting. There's still being a community of people, which I find quite touching, actually, that they that this old group of people they're still brought together, while people who lived in Oak Ridge, their memory of the war is much more dispersed, and they don't meet the same way. So here's like a different type of group of people.
Yeah, this difference in kind of how the group sees itself is really interesting in Wheat, or Oak Ridge as it became. And you mentioned that it was seen as an exemplar for obviously scientific research, but also ideas about kind of what a city should look like and how people should relate to each other. Can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what those ideas were and how they were sort of embedded in Oak Ridge?
Sure. The Oak Ridge was a they call it city, but in our view today we'll call it a town. Maybe on the peak it was about 70,000 people or something like that who lived there, in and out. They were organized in different houses, and the house, because everything was built so quickly, the house with the living quarter was the main place to sort of way to think about the place. If you were a professor, or you were a leader, or a military a person of importance, you will get a bigger house, and then depending on your social rank in society, you'll get a less and less admirable place to live. And if you had if you're a person of color, which was exactly 10% of the town. You would live in basically hutmeds and tents. So there was a racially informed, racially segregated place, and that ways of thinking about segregation would continue in America with Oak Ridge as some sort of ideal. Now, obviously, before Oak Ridge, there was segregation too. I'm not denying that. In Wheat, was a white community. So that's real, and it's not that was a big change in the culture, but what happened with the Manhattan Project, that it was sort of formalized and made into a systematic way of thinking about urban planning. So there you go. That was also part of the suffering, and the point I want to make here is that when we think about nuclear bombs, it's so easy to think about the victims in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and rightly so, because they were true victims. There's no question about that. But sometimes I think the issue of victimhood can also be reflected on the way what the bomb did to American culture, to American landscape. So in Wheat, Wheat is still destroyed in terms of the environment, and probably will be so for the many, many years. The land, the water, and the people are still suffering for what happened there, and that's also a type of suffering or trail of victimhood that is not really discussed in the same way. So I want to bring that to the forefront, that Americans too suffered from this bomb.
Yeah, that's definitely worth mentioning to broaden out this conversation. There's also the element that even the people who weren't directly impacted by the production of the bomb or the using of it, even people who weren't immediately there, for example, in the US or even in Japan, were aware of what was happening and had feelings about it, had a lot of fear around it, in fact. And one of the things you do in the book is use media to help us understand kind of what that looked like on the everyday societal level. Can you give us some examples of how this kind of fear showed up for sort of normal people in the popular press in both the US and Japan?
Sure. So one thing I wanted to do in this book was to not look at so much at the archives of the Manhattan Project, the archives of the science part of the history, which is what I've done in my other works. That is the work of the elite, if you like. I wanted to look at what what the bomb look like for ordinary people. So I've been going through literally thousands of popular journals, newspapers, because all this is now very recently been available online. So I can just do it on my computer and do like word searches to see how does the nuclear weapon language appear as in popular media. And what I found is that the language of bombs, the language of explosion, of fallout, of radiation, all that language seeped into so many other conversations beyond the bomb itself. The obvious kind of example would be, the fear of the chocolate bomb, right? It will make you grow, I guess, like a mushroom. And then you have the different other fears. Another one which I don't document in my book is the fear in Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, in which the fear of DDT spreads around in the environment as if there's some sort of gas radioactive cloud and kills all the birds. The same type of metaphor. So I'm interested in that, and what I do document is the ways that the atomic bomb metaphors seeps into the way we so many debates would be framed. For instance, I found like a whole debate about people thinking the Bible bomb. Think about that. Like, if you prayed enough, they will have a effect as if it was a nuclear bomb. So that these things of the truth bomb, the fact bomb, all debates like that will be part of the media reflection of the bomb.
Can we talk about one of those ways it comes to language, a specific one of them? Because as you said, it comes out in a lot of different ways. One of them is the bombshell, the idea of a sexy, often blonde woman being a bombshell. We take it for granted now, but how did that happen?
So this actually came to me I was at the airport, and I saw a picture of a woman that was framed as a bombshell. And she actually happened to be a student of mine. So I was like, oh, why is she there in a bombshell kind of outfit? And I kind of thought about, like, that is strange, that we can call a woman a shell, which is an insult. There's nothing inside, right? It's only the surface. And a bomb, which is destructive. So you're destructive and dim, if you like. So it is actually, if you just look at the word itself, it is a deep insult. Yet it's constantly being used, being a bomb shell or a sex bomb, mostly on women. I found one instance of a man being that. That was just one. I found two of people of color being that, but it's mostly women, and more often than not, it's blonde women. Typically Marilyn Monroe would be an example. Brigitte Bardot would be another. But there'll be a host of them. We're talking, I think I found at least 50, 60 examples, and those, I feel I'm just digging on the surface of this type of literature. And the way they're portrayed is that they are sort of in an unexplosive moment, and then they're about to explode in the viewer's imagination, and then there will be a fallout, like when a real bomb goes out, there'll be a fallout, being basically unfaithful to this woman, and she will be radioactive. That is, she radiate a lot of energy, I guess, sexual energy. So you find this sort of language of the bomb being part of the way women often would describe themselves, because this is a language that more often than not are used by one woman to describe another, but often for a male audience. So you have a female journalist describing a woman this way, and for a male audience, and often associated with film industry or movie industry or radio, and then it would seep into college language. But rarely used and say to describe your wife or your someone close to you, your daughter, say, or something like that. So it's always used about describing someone far away, someone who's not accessible to you. I think it's a very problematic language for obvious reasons, and I'm a man, so I should I don't know. I think it's just, I just think it's problematic that we associate sexiness with something as destructive as a bomb. Sexiness should be, and attractiveness should be associated with something positive and good. So in that sense, I think women too, or women describe this in this way, in their way, is a victim of a type of description that is not really productive. But more than that, I don't want to be sort of moralistic about it. I'm also concerned about how this language made the bomb look innocent and the bomb look good, and because a way of making the bomb cool and attractive. So this language made the bomb attractive, if you like. There were bomb parties, there were bomb girls, there were bomb, serving the military. So the women's body was constantly being used in popular press to promote the bomb or promote a cool culture around the bomb. And in this connection, when the man would see the woman, he would be frustrated, and then he'll get bombed by alcohol. So the idea of getting bombed by alcohol has associated with being a victim of being approached or seeing a bombshell woman. So there's all this going on in military literature to make the bomb look good and attractive. And it's also used to describe. I think the first instance that I found of it was described in the of describing women in Nagasaki who had just been bombed, literally, right, and now they're being turned into sex bombs. So there's this sort of language, as this is like in soldiers' literature, of how because there were many women in Japan at the time, they were basically served as sex workers. So the sex workers too got this kind of language of being sex bombs for the soldiers. So there's that side to it too, which I think is not so cool.
Yeah, no, it's definitely worth thinking about this language and these associations, particularly given, as you mentioned, kind of the way in which the military was very actively using these in the decades of the mid-20th century. But of course, there's more entanglements than just the use of the word bombshell for, sexy white blonde women. There's also, I mentioned at the beginning, the bikini swimsuit, or the phrase nuclear family, or causing fallout. Can we talk about some of those examples?
Sure. The bikini swimsuit became and those who are listening in may not be completely aware of this, but the bikini is actually an atoll or a little island in the Pacific. And on this island, there were some, huge bombs being, they called it tested out. I don't like the word tested. It sounds like, it's innocent, like some sort of laboratory thing. These huge bombs were blown up and blew up these entire islands, and with that island culture, that is the indigenous people, the bikini people who lived there, and they were victims not only for a short period, but for their generation and their next. Indeed, they're still victims today in the sense they cannot return to the Bikini Atoll. Bikini Atoll is basically a ring of small islands, and you have lagoon in the middle. So if you imagine that, it looks like the navel, and that's how the bikini swimwear came about. It's like the radical thing about the bikini swimwear was that it was a woman will show her belly button, and the belly button looks like a hole in the stomach, if you like, and so that would be in reference. So the belly button would be in reference to that bikini atoll, and there the stomach would then be the Pacific Ocean. So in that bikini swimsuit metaphor, there's sort of an allegory to some sort of a Mother Earth figure, that the Earth is the female body, with the Pacific Ocean being the stomach, and then the belly button being the bikini atoll being exposed. At least that's how, when the bikini swimsuit was introduced in Paris in after the war, we're now in 1947 or something. The 46, 47, Paris was wild. The war was over. It was like libertine culture, partying. It was a sense of celebration. And in this connection, the bikini swimsuit was launched in order to celebrate, the end of the war culture. And joy of the Parisians. It was when the first swimsuit came out, the no model wanted to wear it, so there was was basically a stripper who was asked to do it and to wear it on the first showing of it, and that too created this sort of allure of something illegal. And for many years, or at least 2-3 years, the bikini outfit was not allowed to show in newspapers and magazines, and it became like a haute couture kind of item for the chic in Paris. But then it moved on to different countries, and by the late 40s, early 50s, it was seen as something that only like the daring people would show it. It also had a lot of debate around it. Is it a type of swimsuit that only a certain body could wear, and so forth. But with all that, bikini became a way of also masking what had happened in the Pacific Ocean, the suffering, the awful things that happened in Bikini and Nwanak and many other atolls in the Pacific, where indigenous people had been forced to leave under military rule by the Americans, using bombs that were so large that it made the bomb over Hiroshima into a sort of little bullet in comparison. We're talking huge bombs. That would devastate these islands and these places, and that history and that story is sort of it's been masked over, so that it's not really part of the legacy. I mean, go into a computer and you put in the word bikini, and it's not Bikini Atoll that comes up, right? It's all swimwear models. So that's kind of still today around in the history of that place. So a place that been through all kinds of suffering, and a place that is still suffering. If any bikini or people are listening in, I'm with you. You've been under terrible history of suffering from not only being displacement, but also cancers and other type of illnesses caused by these horrible bombs. So so there you go. So the swimsuit is part of that masking of the bombs, part of not us being willing to deal with it. And just to be clear, I'm not a moralist. Women can of course wear whatever they want, or men for that matter. But maybe we should not use the word bikini to describe the swimsuit. Maybe we'll just call it a swimsuit or outfit or something to that sense, in order to avoid this masking. In terms of the nuclear family, the nuclear family is a word that was used before the nuclear bomb. It came in the late 30s, I believe, first use time. But those were like in intramural, anthropological journals. But after the war, the idea of a nuclear family became much more of a popular word used in popular, magazines. And I'm writing kind of a people's history of the bomb here. The nuclear family could both be a tragedy, in the sense that what is left from a family is only the nuclear family, like your mom, dad, and a couple of kids, maybe, because the rest of the family is gone. Especially in Europe, where there was so much devastation, or Japan. In America, it could also be like a seedlings of a new beginning, right? Like a new family, like a mom, dad, and 2 kids, and we're starting a new tree, so to speak. So there's also hope in it. The family could then have a bombshell will come by, so to speak, and the family will blow up, and that will cause a fallout, right? So then the man or the woman being unfaithful, in most of the popular stories, is the man being unfaithful, and then the fallout will happen due to the the bombshell walking in. So these metaphors in romantic stories are there. And what is the remedy? What to do? I found here, especially say the sermons on a Friday on Sundays in magazines that were dominated or had more of a Christian audience. They said in order to avoid the fallout of a nuclear family, when the wife in particular was and also the young women were asked to radiate. It's very important to radiate love, radiate energy, radiate that you're funny and all these things. But the word radiation will be seen as what we today will be called like charming, I guess. So it was as if people wanted to behave as if they were radioactive in order to create a better family dynamic. This is just another example of how the language of the bomb seeped into every part of human action, including what to pray for in the church. And I think that is just phenomenally strange how this language will pop up in all kind of odd places like that.
Well, one place it pops up is actually somewhere I certainly was fascinated to read about in the book. I wasn't necessarily expecting this there, which is some of the early debates around what was happening to the climate that are very much the precursor to today's discussions about climate change. How and why did discussions around nuclear weapons sort of end up in this space?
Good question. So I was actually really surprised to see this myself. But imagine this: you are a housewife, and these debates actually would sometimes come from concerned, uneducated citizens, and you read about the nuclear bombs going up in the sky. This happened in particular in Nevada, where there were other sites for testing, and you see all this energy. And you see in the popular press a lot of big bombs going off, and you think, wow, all this energy. And you think, what type of impact does this have on the weather? People like to talk about the weather, right? So you see explosion of lots of energy into the weather, and later you see there's a rainfall, or there's wind, or there's warming weather, and you think, there's a connection. So then you write to the local meteorologist in the newspaper, and you say, hey, there's a warmer weather today. That must be because of the atomic bombs. And the local weather guy would write back in the various letters saying, no, that's not the case. All these nuclear bombs going off, and we're talking close to 1,000 bombs over a long period. But in the 50s and 40s, we're talking, maybe 100, 150 bombs going off. These bombs had no impact on the weather, just make that clear. But at the time, that was not completely clear, especially not to lay people who really thought that all these bombs had a huge impact on the weather. So the question came in, they had to ask, and the scientists will have to answer and explain, no, the warmer weather is not due to the bombs. And people agreed at the time that things were getting warmer. So already back in the 40s and the early 50s, and we're now like late 40s and early to mid 50s, there were particularly warm summers in America, but was also noticed a change in the environment towards warmer weather, and people wondered why. So if nuclear bombs was not the reason, and these debates would happen, like the last page of the newspaper where they'll talk about weather next week and tomorrow, the scientists will have to come up with other answers. So you call the local scientist, and the local scientist will come with all kind of explanations. There's warmer weather drifting in from here and there. There's the this and that. There's the continental shelf. There is the all kind of other like warmer oceans. All these things. But in these explanations, I found that this is the place where carbon dioxide pollution from cars will come in as a speculation, and then over time more and more as the solution for why things are getting warmer. So late 40s, 50s, and into the late 50s, carbon dioxide from cars is the reason for why for warmer weather, not the bomb. And so you have like and by the end of the 50s, the silly view that like they're portrayed as the stupid woman usually, or the stupid lay person who doesn't know better would think it's not nuclear bombs, but no, the educated person will know that it is carbon dioxide. So that would be just the solution, and you portray that as a journalist. There's an ignorant way, and then there's the enlightened way, and the enlightened will be carbon dioxide. Note that carbon dioxide is invisible. You cannot see it, and you cannot smell it. It is there, but and in the way it is, it's very similar to radioactivity. You cannot see it, you cannot smell it, but it's there. So there is this sort of same sense of like of explaining what it is, and not only that, it's invisible. I mentioned that, but it's also the sense of explanation that sort of now portrays carbon dioxide as some sort of slow explosion, like the bomb that is spreading in the atmosphere, and that's kind of interesting. And then it's kind of interesting that it's through these lay people asking this, if you like, silly question, it must be the nuclear weapons. They're allowing for the idea that human impact can change the weather. Right, so that's what we call anthropogenic climate change. That human can cause climate change. That was a very radical idea, but the idea that nuclear weapons could do something with the weather opened up for the idea that no, it's alternative, but it's another human cause, namely carbon dioxide. And in that debate, the normal weather patterns that was kind of sidelined. And here I think I'm actually doing quite original research, because very few people have been looking into the idea of that global warming, as it was known back then, and maybe should be known today, was discussed at length in the newspapers in the 50s, late 40s, and or throughout the 50s. Extensive debate. Debate is not politicized. That is. It was discussed in conservative journals or newspapers. I went through Alabama, various newspapers in Alabama had extensive debate about this, but also Northwest, New York Times, liberal leaning, if you like. So there's no Republican versus Democrat view here. All political parties, all political leaning newspapers would accept and embrace this debate more like as a science debate than as a political debate as it is today.
That is very interesting to investigate. And to be honest, I'm kind of pleased that you were also surprised by it, because I found that definitely an unexpected aspect of the book. Was there anything else that you came across in the process of putting this together that really surprised you?
I was not surprised, but I was taken aback by all the suffering and all the upheaval this bomb has caused. From urban planning to the way we treat the earth, through climate change, to the way we think about women's bodies, and the mistreatment of indigenous people, all these things. I was like, wow, this bomb really had an impact in American culture. And so one of my aims with this book was to write it. I wanted to make it really short, because people don't like books anymore. So I put everything into 100 pages, which I'm really proud of. And I want to make it really readable. So I have tested it out on my students, on my parents, on whoever wants to read it, to make sure that it's all very readable. And I wrote every chapter with different kind of angles to it. So the first chapter is about indigenous history. The second chapter is environmental history. The third chapter is about gender history. The fourth chapter is a colonial history, that is America in the Pacific. And the final chapter is about climate history. So I wanted to have different flavors and show that the bomb had impact in all these different things. And finally, I really wanted to shift the narrative and saying that the history of the bomb is not about elitist scientists working in some fancy laboratory. It's not about Oppenheimer and his friends. It's not really about Einstein or physics even. it's really about how, at least I want this to be a story about how ordinary people reacted to the bomb. For instance, I found by accident that the first negative reaction to the bomb, we're talking like a week or so later, in late August, came from African people on the street, African Americans, that is, on the street in New York and New Jersey. They were like, "Hey, this is not good." While scientists was like, "Yay, we made it!" Right? So it seems like ordinary people on the street, people of color, because they associated themselves or sympathized with other people of color, other people in Japan. But later, ordinary people would be very upset about the bomb. So the first resistance to the bomb did not come from the scientists; it came from ordinary people. And there's a lot of worries in the op-ed papers and letters to the editors and interviews and stuff. I've been reading a lot of worries about the bomb that I don't think has done justice to the general literature of the bomb, which is much more focused on the elite's reaction to the bomb, whatever the presidents say and the scientists say. So I want to shift debate away from the scientists and the elite to people on the ground, so to speak.
Yeah, people on the ground in a lot of different senses, being impacted by the creation of it, being impacted by the further testing of it, and being impacted by the existence of it, and having to go about one's daily life with that awareness. So thank you for taking us through the different aspects of the book. Is there anything you're currently working on or looking to work on next that you want to give us a brief sneak preview of?
Well, I just finished this one, but right now I'm working on a new book on walking. The ground up perspective, the perspective of what the world look like from the ground is very much with me, and I think when I walk, I have a slower, more awareness around me. So right now I'm working on what it means to walk, history of walking, theory, philosophy of walking in the world the wonderful world we're living in.
All right. Well, that sounds intriguing. So best of luck with that project.
Thank you.
In the meantime, of course, listeners can read the book we've been discussing, titled For the Love of Bombs, The Trail of Nuclear Suffering, published by Anthem Press in 2025. Peder, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast.
Thank you so much, Miranda, for having me on your podcast. Appreciate it really a lot.